Welcome to another episode of Problem Busters, where we share people and their ideas to fix the problems that we see around us. And of course, I am joined with my co-host, Jonathan. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm all right. You've had a busy week, haven't you?
Yes, very, very busy. But I was looking forward to this podcast today because we have a special guest today, don't we?
And it's my turn to tell the story, isn't it? So we have with us today Alice Lieutier, and I'm sorry for butchering your name, Alice, but that is the best that a Kiwi who didn't grow up speaking French can do. Alice is the head of coaching at an organisation called Makers, and that effectively means that she runs a team of people who are helping people learn to code. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. So, first of all, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up getting to the place that was helping people learn about engineering and development?
Sure. So I'm French, and I grew up not really knowing what I wanted to do, but I was quite good at math. In fact, my dad's a mathematician, and so I fell into it when I was a kid. And I feel like I always kind of took the default option. And so what happened to me is in high school, I liked math, and so I took math after high school. I didn't want to do medicine, so I went into engineering. And then after 2 years, I didn't want any more physics or thermodynamics, and so I took software engineering, and that's how I landed in the software industry, basically. So after that engineering degree in software engineering, I had a number of jobs in a few different companies in the software industry, culminating with 3 years at Facebook a few years ago, and then I kind of burnt out, and I kind of realized, well, I never really chose what I want to do. I always took the default option, and so I took some time for myself. I went traveling. I reflected on what is it that I really want to do, and when I came back from that, I realized I want to work more with people. And ever since then, I've been making choices around working more with people, and that has quite naturally led me to coaching, because it's a way of doing something completely new, education, which I didn't know much about, to be fair, but still relying on all the things I've done before and all of the experience I've had. And so I've been a coach at Makers for about 2 years and a half, and I've been managing the team for about a year now.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a really succinct summary. If only I could summarize my career so succinctly, Jonathan. One question that I've been burning to ask you since reading about some of your journey to date is, could you explain to folks what a hackathon is and what it felt like to win one at Facebook?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I joined Facebook because I won a hackathon that they were organizing. And a hackathon is, it's a word that has hack as in programming, and athon as a marathon. And the idea, or traditionally the idea, is that you gather a bunch of people and you give them a short period of time. A lot of the time it used to be overnight, so you give them 24 hours. And they have to produce a small app, a small program, a project. And I was working in London. Someone retweeted me a tweet saying, Facebook is organizing a Women in Tech hackathon. You should absolutely join. And so I applied. And their hackathon was actually a day hackathon, which was nice. It wasn't overnight. We arrived at 8 in the morning. I remember they had really good pain au chocolat, which is something I had, something I had been craving ever since I arrived in London, because I couldn't find a good one, and they had the good ones. And I think it's a non-zero, it was actually part of my decision to then join, that they had such good pain au chocolat. But then, at the start of a hackathon, people meet and then pitch ideas to each other and form small teams, and then you work all day, sometimes all day and night on your idea, and at the end you do a presentation in front of everyone. And so what we did that day, I paired up with someone else that I met there, and we built a small web app that you can run on your phone. You run the app and you start, you press some kind of play button, and then you jump rope, like you skip, and it counts the skips and then tells you how many calories you burned, or an approximation. And what was quite funny, this was very much the start of fitness trackers, and the first prize for the hackathon, which I didn't know, was actually a Fitbit. So it was very funny to me. Yes, that's what we won, was actually something doing what we had done much, much, much better.
Talk about serendipity.
Yeah. But yeah, so that allowed me to, meet some people at Facebook. Obviously, they were doing this hackathon to recruit people. And so after that, I took some interviews and I joined. And that was in 2012 already, 2013. I wish I remembered. One of these two. 2012. Yes.
Okay. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Yeah. Definitely.
So tell us a little bit about the next role with She Can Code, because I happen to have worked for a business that was run entirely by women and loved it and would like to see a lot more of it. And I know that experience has been quite formative for you, right?
Yes, maybe not in the ways that you think, though, but yes, definitely. So as I said earlier, when I left Facebook, I burnt out a little bit. I think I was just not finding the software developer role as entirely fulfilling as I wanted. When I started at Facebook, the London office was really small, and so I was doing a lot of recruiting. I was doing a lot of mentoring, a lot of these things. And then as the company grew, I was just doing a more standard software developer role, and it was just less fun. And so, as I said, I went traveling, and when I came back from traveling, I was just open to new projects, and I met this person, this woman founder, who was just starting a business right then, and she had been a recruiter, a tech recruiter, and she had seen that there were not enough women coming through. As a tech recruiter, you typically get to work more with men. There's just more men in the industry. And we chatted, and we had seen similar problems from different sides, right? I had seen not enough women come through in the tech industry, and she had seen that either she didn't get many women as a recruiter that she could work with, or sometimes she would get them and they wouldn't pass the interviews. And so we worked together for about 5 months, really trying to build a product around that. And I think it taught me so much, because on one side, it taught me a lot about diversity. This is a time when I read so much about diversity and women in tech, and how that, what are the dynamics there at play for why there are, so few women in tech. But it also taught me so much about trying to set up a business when you're two people coming from very different backgrounds. It taught me about how, just because there's a problem doesn't mean that there's an easy like doesn't mean that there's a solution that will appear. And we know there's this problem, but we wanted a product, because when you want to create a startup, you want a product to answer that problem. And in fact, I think we realized that we couldn't really make a product that would solve that problem. We kind of tried a few different things, but we never really solidified the product that would solve this. And so it was really a schooling into trying to grow a business, trying to understand what it takes to create a product, and what can make a product work or not work. Ultimately, it didn't work, and we drifted apart. But I also learned so much, as I said, about diversity, and I met a lot of women who either wanted to go into tech or were already in tech. And in fact, one of the women I met was someone who had trained at Makers, and later on I remembered her and I applied to Makers.
Amazing. It's funny how things just lead us from one person to another, or one thing to another, right? If we have our eyes open. So let's talk about the problem, shall we, Jonathan?
Yes. So what is the problem you'd like to discuss, Alice?
Right. So this actually builds up on that previous experience. The tech industry needs more people. We know that the world is relying more and more on tech, and there's just not enough people trained into tech. But even more interesting to me, the tech industry needs more diverse people. The tech industry needs more women. The tech industry needs more people of color. The tech industry needs more people who come from a whole lot of underrepresented backgrounds. And that's, to me, that is really the problem I'm trying to solve. Train more people who wouldn't have otherwise gotten the opportunity to get into the tech industry.
Perfect. I think that's a really interesting problem, because being a person of color, I can see when you talk about opportunity. When my parents came over to the UK in the 50s, it would be interesting to sort of have this problem solved, where you're trading a different environment with a different set of skills that worked over there, and now you're coming to sort of like a metropolitan city and seeing what can you actually achieve, and where can you go, and who can help you solve that problem of sort of upskilling and sort of integrating into your surroundings. So the second question to that, Alice, is how are you going about solving it?
Yeah, for sure. So that's really interesting what you say, because there's I think the core of the problem is that there's a strong idea that in order to be a developer, you need to have a CS degree. And maybe if you didn't choose that earlier on in your life, then it's too late. And there's also an idea that in order to be a developer, you need to be a genius. You need to be really, really smart. And if for a reason or another you were not, you were into spheres that were not in that way reflected to you as a very, very smart, sphere or universe, you may feel like, well, that's not for me. I can't do that. And I think that's really wrong. I think that's actually an idea that hurts the tech industry a lot, because it prevents a lot of amazing people to join. And there's a big problem also, obviously, of representation. You go to places where you see other people like you succeed, and until that is fixed, there's not much we can do. So what we do at Makers is we train developers. We train developers in a non-traditional way. So we're not a degree. It takes just a few months if you train with Makers to go from wanting to change your career and never really having looked at code to then get a job as software developer. Obviously, it takes slightly different amount of times for each person, but I've seen many people now do this whole turnover of, I don't think my career is for me anymore, I want to change, and to 1 year later being happily employed into a software developer role. And I think that means that we access a lot of people who earlier on had different opportunities and didn't know that this was an option for them, or were not able to, you know, take that opportunity and can now do it. They can do it later in life. They can do it with more experience, and that creates amazing new people for the tech industry, because that creates people who bring something different than, you know, the traditional high school, then engineering degree, and then software world.
I know someone who has an engineering degree.
Oh,
don't I, Jonathan?
Who might that be?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, when you looked around the room when you were in engineering, Jonathan, how many women were in the room, or how many people of color?
Just my wife, who's actually a woman of color and an engineer. So we met in university, but it was diverse. But I can honestly say there were a lot of men compared to women. There was a handful of women, and the women in there typically came from a background of either their parents were either an engineer, or because I did civil engineering, or were in construction. So it is, you know, opening up these opportunities for people is I think one of the best one of the best problems to solve. If I'm honest,
Agree. Alice, could we just take it back a step for people who perhaps have thought about the idea of becoming a software engineer, but A, thought they didn't have the degree early enough, or B, perhaps thought that you had to be super smart, as you quite rightly said. What is a CS degree, and what is the alternative to becoming a software engineer if it wasn't the option that you just talked about at Makers? Because I think that gives people an idea of how much of a change Makers can bring to the market.
Yeah. So I think the traditional degree would be 5 years, would be a master's of science. What I did was in France, so it's a slightly different terminology, but it was software engineering degree. And again, it was 5 years after high school. A lot of theory, and just 5 years of university, which can be quite costly in time and money. Now, in fact, we have known for a while that this is not the only way into being a developer. Even before Makers existed, there have been self-taught developers. And I feel like this is quite interesting, because as a doctor, you never meet, you know, a self-taught doctor, or at least maybe you don't entirely trust them to operate on you. But in the software world, there always were those people who were self-taught. The thing is, in fact, in order to do a CS degree, or in order to be self-taught, you still need to have a lot of drive. In order to be self-taught, you better have people around you who believe you can do it, and you better believe yourself that you can do it. So the self-taught route is possible, but it's a really long road with so many opportunities for being discouraged by not having the right resource, or the right people around you, or the right environment, or the right amount of time. And I think this is really where bootcamps. So Makers is a bootcamp, and there are a few more bootcamps out there, but Makers was the first one, I think, in the UK.
I hope you don't mean up at 5 a.m. and give me 20 push-ups.
No, yeah, I know. I really don't like the name bootcamp. I mean, I think initially it was definitely, you know, a reference to the military. And it was this idea that in a short amount of time, with a lot of really hard work and hard training, you'll be a tough software developer. But we've moved so much from that, and today, especially at Makers, it's so important for us, for example, that developers balance their well-being with their coding and take time for themselves. And that whole mental health part is actually a really important part of our bootcamp, but the name still stays. And so this thing, the bootcamp is, so for us, it's 16 weeks total. The first 4 weeks are like prep exercises that you do at home. And then 12 weeks of the main course. Traditionally, we do it on site, but currently we're doing it remote, like, a lot of businesses. And so in total, it's 16 weeks. But then there's also a huge part after that, which is career support. And we support people while they're looking for jobs. We help them preparing for interviews. We give them career coaching. And then we're there until they get a job. And in fact, we're there even after, because we have quite a vibrant alumni community with a Slack workspace. And sometimes I describe Makers less as a bootcamp and more as this is a lifelong membership to a crowd of really really welcoming software developers who are going to be there at all points of your life. But obviously it starts with the training, and a lot of the time when people talk about Makers, they talk about the training. So that formula of having a short training, it is such a difference, because it does, I mean, obviously it still involves money. The main course for us is £8,000, which is, I very much appreciate, not zero.
Sure. But compare it to a degree, and
but exactly compared to 5 years of university, it's still quite different. And we do have a few different options too. We have an apprenticeship which is free too. So we have kind of a few different products.
Cool. And the way that we actually came across Makers, right, Jonathan, is referred through a colleague of mine, Josh, who's quite happy for me to share how much he enjoyed the process, and he actually started in theatre and was in administration and thought, I'd like to try coding, I'd like to move into a different arena, and he actually looked at both options of the degree or the bootcamp approach, and it's just fascinating. I mean, he enjoyed it so much that he became a coach for a while, didn't he, Alice? And then has since become a senior engineer with me, and is a really good worker. A really good example of an engineer. So something that really struck me when he started talking about Makers is that you don't teach, right? And that is quite radical. Can you explain a bit about that? Because I think that has wide-reaching ramifications for a lot of the ways that people teach and learn.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I've learned so much about education since I've become a coach, and so much about how people learn. And so when we say that we don't teach, what it looks like is we don't have classes where there is someone who comes in front of the class and starts talking about concepts with this idea of they have the knowledge and they're going to transfer it into people's brains. That idea of knowledge transfer, we don't really believe in it. And we're not the only ones. I mean, there's a lot of, education research that supports that, but that supports the fact that knowledge transfer is not necessarily the way. And in fact, what we are trying to do is we are starting from the idea that people build their own knowledge inside of their brain based on the experiences that they have. And so what is important for us to do is give them experiences that are appropriate to their current level of understanding, and that is going to lead them to expand their understanding and their knowledge and their mental model of how the world works, or at least, how programs and code work. And that takes a lot of different forms. That can be modeling, where I'm going to code in front of developers, and they're going to observe new things and see some techniques that I'm using and pick up some tips there. That obviously takes the form of challenges, where we encourage people to reach a goal, to develop a program that does X, and they have to find their own resources and talk to each other and ask questions until they get there. There's like, they're always pairing, so they're going to work together and kind of challenge each other to explain what they need to do and how they're doing it, and by talking to each other and reflecting and expressing what they understand, they're gonna improve their understanding. And then something
can you explain pairing? Because when I first sort of, when that became a thing, I was like, but surely two people doing something is slower than one person doing one thing and one person doing another, right? Wrong.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It definitely can look that way from the outside. So pairing is when two people work together on the same problem. And so in programming, that is two people working on the same computer, maybe with the same keyboard, and they're working on the same task, and they're talking to each other throughout, and they maybe take turns for who's typing and who's not necessarily directing, but giving a direction. So they take turn, and what is really important in pairing is to kind of share the mental space that you're in and put your two brains together at the same task. And I think it has a lot of benefits for work, for programmers at work. Obviously, it works amazingly well for knowledge transfer. When you have two different people in a team, it's very likely what they know is slightly different, and so if you pair them together, they're going to learn from each other. It works great for motivation when you have to work on a task by yourself, or when you have someone else there working with you and challenging you every step of the way, and you're challenging them. There's a much different drive in terms of how much energy we're putting into the task that we're doing. So it can really help when you're struggling with motivation and drive. It helps with spotting mistakes or spotting small things. Obviously, two pairs of eyes are always better at spotting typos. But also for us in learning, and you're laughing, but if you don't program, maybe you don't know this, but I always tell developers, new developers, 99% of your bugs as a beginner developer is going to be typos. And typos, like one typo can take you 2 hours to fix. If you don't see it, you don't see it, and you don't know where the problem is, and your debugging technique is not there yet. It can be really, really hard to find it. And I think as you become a better developer, it's not that you do fewer typos, maybe you do, but it's more that you get very good at attention to detail, and you're able to spot one space that is not where it needs to be, or one character that is not where it needs to be, and that's really something that you develop as a developer. Yeah.
And people, as a product person, my developers are constantly correcting my spelling, and bless them, I am becoming better grammatically as a result.
But I think that's something that you have to develop as a developer, because typos will lose you so much time early on. So a second pair of eyes that spots the typo as you're writing it is saving you so much time. And in fact, the time you spend coding, especially as a beginner, is going to be much less than the time you spend debugging, finding your bugs. So if you can if you can have fewer bugs as you write the code, it's definitely going to save you a lot of time. But there's another reason we use pairing, because for us it's all about learning. People are going to learn from each other, and what we do is we change pairs every day. So imagine you have a cohort of 20 people, and on day one, person A pairs with person B, and they're showing them something. And then on day two, person A pairs with person C, and person B pairs with person D, and now all 4 of them knows that new thing. And then on the next day, there's 8 people knowing that new thing. And it's so useful to be able to disseminate knowledge like this, where each person is going to bring new knowledge to the rest of the cohort.
Without PowerPoint slides, huh?
Yeah, without PowerPoint slides. And in fact, I really, really hate PowerPoint slides. When we were on site, I was always on the whiteboard. When someone or at a desk, people were making fun of me because I had a clipboard, like this thing where you have sheets of paper and they're all clipped together. But that's because I'm a very visual person, and I really like to, when I chat with someone, I really like to make a drawing to kind of explain something in a way that is not just the explanation in words, but also some other mode, so a visual mode here in the sense. And then I would give away the sheet of paper, so clipboard was really useful for that. But those explanations still happen. I mean, it's not like the coaches never ever say anything about what they know to the devs, but the devs seek answers from the coaches, and that's something else that I think is important for us. In the workplace, like as a developer, you have to learn throughout your life, right? Technology changes all the time, and you have to be constantly learning. There may be new technologies that you have to use. And because you have to learn throughout your life, it's in fact more important for us that devs are going to be able to learn new things later on. And so without coaches there, without teachers, without, a course that takes them through a number of set exercises, they will have to find their own resources. So it's important for us that they, as early as possible, they start that way. At work, you're going to be given a goal for a task, and you're going to have to find the resources that will help you. And that's what we do on the course. We give them a goal, and they're going to have to Google, they're going to have to ask questions, they're going to have to ask each other, they're going to have to ask a coach. And they're going to gather all those pieces of knowledge together and, become developers.
Yeah, it was really interesting saying to Josh, how has being a coach changed your approach to parenting? And it's amazing. He said, he just sees his children going through a lifelong learning process. And he said, the direct quote, I hope you don't mind, Josh, is because it's so cute, is I see endless learning opportunities in their daily lives. And that says a lot about the mentality of a coach, I think.
Yes, definitely. Everything is learning opportunity. I think sometimes devs can be a little bit frustrated when they come to us with, a bug that they've been quite frustrated because they really want to solve it. And we're so happy, and we're celebrating this, saying this is a great learning opportunity. Let's see how we can make sure that next time you find this, you know exactly how to solve this, but also how to solve all other bugs that are in the same category. And so there's something else that we like to do, is that we focus a lot on the processes. There's this idea that there's a number of levels of mastery of something. There's the level at which you can really concretely do something. Maybe the right syntax to write a function in Ruby. And then there's the level at which you can actually, talk about it and define the concepts behind it. And then there's a level at which you can use it in a lot of different ways and use it as building blocks to solve bigger problems. And you really have a process around it. And then maybe there's a top level around behavior. You've really embedded that new problem-solving way into everything you do, not just programming. And at Makers, we try to focus on the top two levels, the behaviors and the processes, with this idea that the syntax for writing a function in Ruby and the concept of what is a function are typically two things you can very easily find on Google. And so you don't really need a coach for that, but the coach can bring you so much value into like improving your mindset or finding a better process. And when I say process is like, how long should I wait before I ask a question? How do I search into Google? How do I tackle a problem where I don't know where to start? How do I make a plan? How do I debug?
And do you know what's amazing about this is something that honestly made me quite anxious when I was going through my 4.5 years of university, was that I just felt like what I was learning wasn't going to be applied to what I needed to do in the real world, And I don't know if it was the same for you and also for you, Jonathan, and engineering, but I get the feeling engineering's a bit more concrete, pun intended. But it just really worries me that people spend so much time and so much money and come out maybe having learned how to learn, but perhaps not knowing the things they need to know to be useful today, and importantly, to get a job today.
Yeah, definitely. So much. I felt that way so much when I left university. I felt like I know all those concepts, but I have no idea how to create an app. I have no idea how to create a website. I didn't know, honestly. And if there's one thing I can say of devs at Makers is that when they leave Makers, they know how to make an app. And in fact, in the final projects, which are the last 2 weeks, they choose what they want to do completely out of, what do we want to learn and what product would we like to see into the world? And they just teach themselves how to do it. And a lot of the time it uses new frameworks, new languages, things they've never learned on the course. And they just do it. And they typically don't really ask for coaches' help. Maybe twice 30 minutes in the course of 2 weeks. And they create those amazing projects. So yeah, that's always, when I see that, I always feel really, really admirative because it's so far removed from where I felt when I left university.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I've done all the talking, Jonathan. You must have some questions stored up.
No, I was really just interested, just into really the methods of knowledge transfer without using obviously the traditional PowerPoints, and Alice has gone through those, which is always quite interesting to see how at every turn we can all try and get away from that burden of the PowerPoints. But going through with obviously stripping out those older sort of techniques of knowledge transfer and teaching people, what kind of mistakes did you bump into, or did you ever have any sort of any challenges you had to overcome with I guess it's not necessarily compressing like a degree into the boot camp, but what sort of challenges did you overcome that you wouldn't necessarily have had to if it was sort of a longer course?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think for me it's obviously I didn't create the curriculum at Makers. I joined Makers and there was a lot of curriculum already there, and I've added my stone to it. But I think when I saw what was done, it really made sense because I could reflect on the contradiction of having studied software engineering for like 2 years part-time and then 3 years full-time. So having done a 5 years degree with software engineering and still not feeling like I can write an app out of that. but also feeling like there were so many things in that degree that even then during the degree didn't entirely made sense as to why we were learning that, and sometimes it felt a little bit like, well, we're learning that because there's this researcher that works in the lab that is at the uni that is really interested in this, and that's they have to teach something and that's what they want to teach. As opposed to what are the skills that you need in that job, and let's make a list of skills and let's focus on those skills. So I always felt a little bit like there was some amount of waste, and not saying that like those things were not interesting on the theoretical point of side, or that there were not interesting information, but I always felt that there were some things that were maybe not as useful, and that the degree was missing things. And then the other thing is that there's a lot of things that you learn in a university degree that are very theoretical and don't come up as much in the job. But also something else is that you can learn all of that on the job. There's so much you can learn on the job. And so I think a little bit the idea with Makers is let's get people started. Let's get people at a level where they can get their first job and they can still be, right away from their first job, they can be productive, they can slot into a team. They know about teamwork, because that's also something that we do. They know how to communicate, and they know how to solve a ticket. They know what a ticket is, which I didn't know when I went into the industry. They know what deploying an app means, which I didn't know when I went into the industry. So they have all of this context with them, and so they can be productive right away. And then in that first job, and in fact, in every other job they'll get after that, they can teach themselves what they're missing as they go. And they will teach themselves what they need when they need it, which I think is a much more powerful, reason to teach yourself than just you have a final about it. So yeah, I think that's what we're trying to focus on. What are the skills that are going to make you a great junior developer, so that you can have some breathing room in your jobs to then learn everything else you need. Yeah.
So what would you say to someone young who is thinking, I did a bit of coding at school and I'd like to be a software engineer like my auntie or my uncle?
I'm wondering why you added the young here. So,
well, I was thinking that'd be the second question, but maybe take it that way. Maybe that's the point.
Interesting, yeah. So because in some ways, maybe a lot of the people that we get at Makers have done other things before. Sometimes they've done an engineering degree in something completely different. Sometimes they've just got into work quite young, and they've worked a number of years, and then they turned to code. And I don't think that's wrong at all. In some ways, it makes them bring a lot of experience. So I'm always quite careful when I advise young people, because I think the most important thing when you're young is to just live and explore and discover who you are. I tend to not really believe in like let's be the most productive you can be as early as possible. But of course, if that's what you want to do, and if you want to just get a software developer job as early as possible, something like Makers can help. If you're still in high school, looking up coding tutorials and starting to see for yourself, is that really something that you enjoy, is what you should do, absolutely. And in fact, something else that I thought was interesting is when I was in university, a lot of people who were doing really well at uni in programming were people who had kind of taught themselves programming before they went to uni, which if you think about it is a little bit weird. But so you're sitting at uni and you feel like you're struggling a little bit, because I was not the best student at uni for sure. And there were some people who were just really getting it, and I was getting such imposter syndrome until I realized years later that those people had taught themselves to code while they were in high school, and so uni was just a repeat for them. And that's why the teachers could go that fast with the material and everyone, not everyone, but there were definitely a number of people who seemed to be getting it so much faster than I was. That's just because they had done this before. And that's also where you can see how the privilege at play. Like if you come from a family who has been doing programming and who has encouraged you to use a computer after hours to learn to program, you're even going to do better at your CS degree, and you're going to see yourself in that crowd, and that's going to work for you. But yeah, to young people, I tend to always tell them, do whatever you need to do to know who you are. I think up until you're 30, you don't really need to focus on anything else than,
Some might say 40, right, Jonathan? Some might say 50.
No, I mean, for sure. But I feel like at some point when you know a little bit better who you are, you can make much better choices and much more informed choices about what you want to do.
So what about someone who's had a hard year and perhaps has been furloughed, or perhaps has seen their business struggle and is thinking about a change? What would you say to them?
I would say the tech industry is hiring. And in fact, we have a bunch of people who, even before COVID, we've had a number of people come to us because they wanted a future-proof job. That's how a lot of people have phrased it to me. Some people even told me, I've seen my job being replaced by robots. I want to be one of the people who make those robots. But yeah, the tech industry is something that is expanding and will need so many more people in the years to come. But also the tech industry needs people of all sorts. The tech industry needs to have people who represent the population, because the tech serves the whole world, and so tech should represent the whole world, and that it's absolutely not the case at the moment. I mean, I think in a good year, the tech industry is 80% white male.
Yeah.
So in a bad year, it's more. And as we know, that doesn't fully represent the world. So the tech industry needs people with different experiences, and so the tech industry needs you. Now, will you want to be a developer? That's a question only you can resolve. But it's an industry which is hiring. It's an industry which is quite fun to work in, with companies where you'll be cared for, with typically quite good life balance, work-life balance. Not always, but there are definitely a lot of companies that can help you achieve that. Not all tech companies are great, for sure, but they exist. And
it is different, isn't it? Like, did you find that, Jonathan, that when you started to work in tech and you sit around the dinner table back in the day when we could get together with people in the same room that didn't live with us, and you talk to people about how work is for a teacher or a doctor or whatever role it might be, and I just realized that people in tech businesses get treated better, not always, but often.
Yeah, I think it's because, I mean, I have a weird sort of perspective on it, in terms of my dad worked for a really large motor company, and they had this similar approach, but they would sort of tool you up for life as well, because they know that once you join, it was a different time. But I think the tech industry are like leaders in driving in terms of workplace sort of mental health and well-being, which I found quite interesting. That it's the work sort of home life balance seems to be a lot more manageable in the tech industry than in other places. So yeah, when you do sit down and you speak to other people in different roles, you do kind of think, oh, I am quite lucky.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Alice, do you feel like this approach to having the boot camp and learning to learn could be applied to other areas where we have skills shortages? So, for example, in New Zealand and Australia, where I've come through, they talk about the greying of the trades, meaning that people who are in trade positions and just generally vocationally trained positions are in decline, and young people aren't coming into those areas, and people aren't training to be a plumber when they're middle-aged, right? Do you feel like this model could apply to other areas that have traditionally had degrees or apprenticeships?
Yes, some industries. So it needs so it's interesting because what we were saying before about people, you're treated slightly better in the tech industry. I think that people in the tech industry are quite privileged, and that also comes with the fact that it's not very diverse, and maybe if it was less diverse, it would be less privileged as in a place to work, because that's what we see typically. Professions that become more and more feminized typically tend to earn less and less, which is always a worrying trend.
If there's one thing we could change in our generation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
well, but I'm saying this. I think in order for the boot camp works because a lot of people want to go into the tech industry, and that works because the tech industry is quite attractive, and the main reason why people don't go into there is because they either didn't have the opportunity for a reason or another, but a lot of the time is they didn't realize that it was something they could do. So a lot of people out there will say, well, working at Google seems amazing, but surely that's not something that would ever be possible for me. And so that's quite powerful, because we are saying, well, why not? You know what? Maybe we can do something here. And so I think tech is interesting because there's a shortage of people, but it's not necessarily that there's a shortage of attractiveness. And so I don't know how it is with plumbing in Australia, but I don't know if the problem is that people are not attracted to it, or that people don't feel like they could do it. And so I think tech has kind of this unique combination of it needs people, and yet it is still very attractive, which is weird. Normally, if it's very attractive, there's way more than enough people, and it's just because it has been kind of placed like this as something unattainable, I think. But that's where the bootcamp works best. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of my main thing that I think about. I think about jargon, the use of jargon and how it excludes people. People like to use those big words to that make them sound smart, but in fact are just a marker of what they're trying to be. And I always feel like actually people who don't really feel threatened don't use jargon as much. So yeah. I'm always on that crusade for like using very plain terms and being always open to questions and to explaining what you mean and welcoming people in. That's something super important for me.
What couple of ideas or bits of advice would you give to software engineers who are listening in terms of what makes a great engineer today and also as they grow?
Well, that's something I ask engineers regularly, because I want to make sure that on the bootcamp we're still training the best engineers that we can. I think so. One thing, a little bit, that's a little bit what I said earlier. One thing that I think is really important for a developer is humility, actually. It's being able to ask questions at whatever level you are, and being very open to saying that you don't know things. And I think sometimes it can feel counterintuitive, but there is... So first of all, if you're a senior engineer and you're able to say, oh, you're doing this, can you show me? I've never done it before. I don't know how to do this. It's very, very powerful, because it can help junior developers ask more questions. It can show them that it's okay not to know something. It can make you feel more approachable. It's extremely powerful. And so I even know, like, sometimes people will even use it, even when they know. And I think that's a good thing. You want to model the fact that you also ask questions and have questions. And that's because a lot of the time, what blocks junior developers is that they're not asking questions because maybe they're slightly ashamed that they don't know yet, and they don't realize that in fact a good tech team is going to be a team that just shares this knowledge with no ego and no attachment to that's. I'm not going to share information, or I need to prove to people that I'm better. Like a team is always at its best when people just fully trust each other and trust that we want to do something good together. And so it's just a waste of time if you don't say that you don't know. So that's a big one for me. Communication is useful. I guess saying I don't know is part of communication, but being able to, like, as a manager, I think about this a lot. Trying to build a team where people really trust each other's intents, and that means being, like, as a manager, that means being, modeling vulnerability and being open. But having a team where everyone can be open means having a team where everyone can ask for support. And so a team that is much happier, and when people are happy, they just do the work, and you don't need to ask them to do the work because they're just doing it out of happiness.
I bet a lot of this probably rings true for you, Jonathan, right? In terms of leading a team. It feels quite universal.
Yeah, I think having the ability, so I think leading back to what Alice was saying with the jargon, which is quite interesting because I try and strip that out of my team. Not completely, but always have an inquisitive mind, and always, I did a bit of project management as well, and you see it's like a completely different language, where you have all these different words that mean different things, and instead of asking, okay, could I have a report, please? Like, where is that deliverable, and where is this, and all of these kind of different terms, and you just think, okay, well, if we strip that all back and we all, we can ask questions and work as a team, we get a lot done. So it's wonderful once you get rid of those sort of barriers to entry, because you can imagine as an outsider looking into tech, and even with yourself, Ollie, with an outsider looking in and seeing some discussions where it's just complete jargon, you're kind of, to an outsider, it's a bit intimidating.
Yeah. And I have to say that sometimes I'm really just trying to save time. And I call it AWS, not just because it's Amazon Web Services and it's faster to say, but also because it's the name sometimes, and things do become simplified and shortened so that we can just get through it quickly. But I'm absolutely humbled by teams that, including my current team, who will just say, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. And it's almost like it's a habit. They may actually know what it is, but they're just reminding me that we don't need to use jargon in order to communicate, It's so important. And the other thing that I just love about tech that you touched on, Alice, is that people saying, I don't know, and other people saying, I'll help you. And then that kind of goes with the idea of pairing, doesn't it? That let's pair on this problem and solve it together. I mean, that is the opposite of day one at a new job, where you sit down and you're like, do I know what I'm doing? Has anyone realized that I don't know what I'm doing? Will I still be here tomorrow? You know, we've all had that feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it's unproductive and unnecessary.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome is something the imposter syndrome is the name that, we give to that feeling of feeling like, surely they made a mistake in my interview and they didn't mean to hire me. If they only knew how little I know. And that's something that we have even in the bootcamp, right? We have devs on the bootcamp who are at some point or another are struggling with the concept, are struggling with the project, and they feel like they don't belong. Maybe they see someone else grasping a concept a lot faster than they do. And I think it's so important to just be able to share that this happens to everyone at every level. Everyone doesn't know some things. Yeah. And I think it's a lot easier to deal with imposter. As soon as you've shared your imposter syndrome, it typically, I'm not going to say it vanishes entirely, but it has a lot less weight on you. It becomes less important, because now that you've shared that feeling with someone and they've accepted you and apparently I can show that I don't know things and I'm still accepted here. So that is super important. And because, as you said, it's just a waste of time to feel like you have to hide things or pretend, or it really is just a waste of time. Yeah.
And speaking of which, Jonathan, I could literally go on all night on this topic because it's so fascinating. Do you think we should move into the sharing section?
Yes, I think we should. So Alice, who do you most look up to in the world? We ask a lot of our guests on Problem Busters.
That's a really, really difficult question for me, because I never really was that person who has role models or mentors. I mean, there's a lot of people that, will do something and I will find it really, really cool. But I don't tend to then, research their life and feel like I have to be like them.
So if I rephrase it, and who would your ideal person that you would like to work your current self into, if that helps? I think at this point I'm at a point in my life where what I want to do is just help as many people as I can. That's kind of my life mission, I guess. I feel like I've been so lucky to be given a number of opportunities that have made me feel more confident, and I just want to share that. So I guess anyone who's doing work around showing how things, like showing people that they can be who they want to be, they can be more confident, they can learn things, that things are achievable, that makes them believe in their dreams. That's what I want to emulate.
On that topic, are there any projects or movements that you're excited about at the moment, particularly those that might help folks that are heading through the makers type direction?
So there are some people who do either comics or Instagram posts to just share things they've learned about code. And in fact, there's I don't know if this is a movement, but I guess maybe it is, this idea of learning in public, which I find really powerful. And it's this idea that as you learn a topic, you're going to share it. Maybe you're going to share it through blogs or Instagram or Twitter. You're going to just share what you're learning as you're learning it.
Maybe through a podcast.
Yeah, maybe through a
podcast. No, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I find that so powerful, because it's to me, it's great because one, it gives other people, I mean, it's exactly the things that animate me. It's you're learning, you're improving yourself, you're growing, and you're showing other people it's possible, and you're sharing knowledge, and people are going to learn from you. And there's one person that comes to mind that I shared her Instagram today with my students. Her name is Samantha Ming. She has an Instagram and she shares JavaScript tips every day, and it seems really, really simple, but it's just she's enthusiastic about JavaScript, and then she shares that, and then she shares what she's learned, and she brings so much energy to that.
That's awesome. We'll put that in the notes for sure. And what about a book or a movie? Oh, sorry, you're still going. Keep going.
I was going to share something else because it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's an article, but I believe it's a book now. So maybe I'm just moving to your next question.
You certainly are.
There's this article called "Laziness Does Not Exist" that, to me, has shaped so much of who I am as a coach. But I think it works for not just coaches. I recommend this as reading for managers, for coaches, but also for devs, and for really anyone who can read English, really. And it's by this person named Devon Price, and they are, I believe they're a psychology professor. And they have now written a book out of it, which I believe is also called "Laziness Does Not Exist." And it's just this idea that a lot of the time what we may write off as laziness, when someone doesn't do something, there's most of the time there are just unseen barriers. There's just things that are blocking them. Maybe it's a psychological blockage. Maybe they don't know where to start. Maybe things are difficult at home. There's a number of reasons why people don't do things, because the natural state of humans is to want to do things. And so to me, it's extremely powerful, obviously, as a coach, because when a dev is not doing the exercises we set out, coming at it from the angle of, if you don't do it, obviously you're not learning, and shaming them for that is the worst thing that I can do. But trying to understand what it is that is blocking them, and removing and focusing on that obstacle and removing that obstacle is actually really, really powerful. And I think you can even do that for yourself. You can observe yourself not doing something and then reflect on the obstacles instead of, worrying and guilt tripping yourself. And if you focus on the obstacle, you can, remove the obstacle and do anything. And that is really so powerful. So yeah, that would be my top advice. I appreciate it's not specifically about tech, but I think it is as valid in tech as it is anywhere.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jonathan, did you have anything else that you'd like to ask Alice while we have her, or should we be respectful of her time?
I do have one last question, if I can.
Go for it, my friend.
For sure.
Be like water.
It'd be like water. In the topic of tech, obviously we're in lockdown now, so what tech is improving your life at the moment, or is quite helpful to you during lockdown?
Interesting. So, I could talk a little bit about the tech that I have to use for my job. We use Zoom and Slack, as a lot of places, but I think that Slack is underrated. Not necessarily Slack the software, but the idea that there's this place where all of your conversation lives, because Slack has given us such a sense of community through lockdown. And I've seen the number of messages really increasing, and people people sharing resources and sharing fun things and reacting to each other, and I still feel like every day I still feel like I'm really joining makers in the morning, and I read the messages and I know what's happening. You know, I'm not in the place, but I know what's happening. But then there's another thing that is a nifty calendar app that I use called reclaim.ai, and they're quite new, and they help me manage my calendar. And I know this sounds like an ad for them, but when I became a manager, it became really hard to manage my time and still have time. Like, my calendar just became meetings basically, and I had to still manage some time for deep work and reflection and breaks. And Reclaim is this thing that reads your calendar, and you tell it, well, I'd like to have 30 to 45 minutes every morning to catch up on my emails, and we'll just find the time in your calendar. And if your calendar is getting more busy, it's just going to block the time and reject incoming requests for meeting for you.
You have my attention.
Yeah, honestly, this has really, really, really helped me manage my time better. And now I've told Reclaim that I want to go to yoga twice a week, and it's making that possible for me. Because we have yoga on site. We have our Chief Joy Officer, Dana, who just does yoga twice a week for our devs, and now I'm joining that too, and it's just so much better. So reclaim.ai, yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you. I will certainly be looking that up. And so how could people find out a bit more about the things that you have to say about the world? And secondly, makers?
Well, I've been wanting to write more, and they listen to this podcast is the answer. But I guess if you are here, you have listened to this whole episode, and you're still here and you want to read more. And one thing you can do is you can send me a message to say, hey, start writing this blog that you've been wanting to write. Because, I have accounts on Instagram and Twitter, but I can't say that I really use them. And so I wish I knew how to answer this question better. I guess that's the honest answer. They can reach me by email.
Sure, and we'll include some contact details. And what about makers? How do people find out more about the idea of a bootcamp and learn to code?
Right, so that's a lot easier. We have a website, makers.tech, where there's a lot of information about training makers. We also run events quite regularly that are open to prospective students. They're all listed on the website. They're also on our Facebook page. And Makers is also quite active on Medium. And what I like about Medium is that we encourage our devs to blog while they're on the course. And so if you go to Medium, you can also see a lot of accounts from devs on the course. And I think it's always nice to not just see, the company content, but also to see the raw journey of people actually going through the course. And there's a number of websites also that do bootcamp reviews. One of them is SwitchUp. So if you want to just see reviews of people comparing different bootcamps, you should absolutely do that. I think choosing a bootcamp is an important life decision. So go read the reviews. Don't just read our marketing content.
That is maybe the most honest thing I've ever heard on a podcast, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alice. And we really could just keep talking about diversity and how people learn and the value of relearning and asking for help. But you've shared so much, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And thanks for tuning in, folks. Don't forget to subscribe, and we look forward to the next person, the next problem, and the next episode.